This is Sean Taylor for Blues in Britain as part of the How Musicians Work series. And today I am delighted to be joined by a great blues, soul, rock and roll UK legend, fantastic performer, with an incredible back catalogue of music that is I recommend to anyone because I've loved going back over it the last week. And so yeah, I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Ian Siegal. Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
Very well. What's been happening?
Oh, blimey. Quite a lot, really. Moved continents and uh, had a very, very busy year last year. But had a few months off, which I needed because I experienced my first ever burnout for real. Um, Apparently, flying back and forward across the Atlantic and going on 9-week tours where you play 10 countries and play every night isn't that great for your health. So that's what went on last year. But recently, everything's cool. Yeah, I've been focusing on home life and all that stuff. But got a tour coming up, so I'm getting prepared now. This feels like part of the preparation.
Yeah. Could you tell us a bit about where you are? Where is home now?
At risk of sounding like a terrible asshole, I live in Curacao, which is it's the Caribbean. Everyone's heard of Aruba, which is next door. It's the next island. Curacao is the big one in the middle, formerly Dutch, now independent, more or less. Not enough, but yeah. So I live here now. Makes touring more interesting. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And I was going to ask because like you've traveled and lived in different places, and I was wondering how traveling and living in different places inspires you as an artist. Is how does that work?
I don't know because I've been, I was lucky enough to have quite a busy career, so I travelled constantly. I think, I only really lived London, Amsterdam, and here, and I think that made me appreciate home more. I never, I never, I always thought I'd enjoy being itinerant, and living out of suitcases was cool. But now I crave home and really appreciate it when I'm here. Got the dog and my wife.
Sweet. That's nice, man. I
Yeah.
remember because when I first, sorry, pick up, Karen.
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
When I first met you, you talked about London because it was in London. It was the Sydenham Arts Festival where I met you, and
Right.
you talked about jamming. I remember going to London jams when you first came to London, and I was
Yes.
wondering about that. What was that like, and how did that inspire you as an artist? Did it make you go a certain way with the music, or how does it work?
Well, I just moved down from Nottingham, where there was a very cliquey, tight scene in quite a good way. All the musicians were older than me, so I got a lot of kind of influence in that scene. But this is the time when you could play 5, 6 nights a week in your local area because every pub had live music. So it became very sort of insular. And somebody said, if I ever wanted to get anywhere or improve as a musician, he said, you've got to leave here because you're too comfortable and go to London or anywhere, but London seemed the obvious place. And go and be a very small fish in a very big pond. And by pure fluke, I moved to Stoke Newington because I had friends there. Went down the road to the local jam session. Oh, excuse me, that's my phone. Turn it off.
It's another jam.
And there was the Weavers Jam. Earl Green was the singer, and there was Lee Sankey. So many sort of London people who became much more well known later. I think Big Joe Lewis would come down there. And that particular night I went at the jam session because they were on tour. Magic Slim, Eugene Hideaway Bridges, and John Primer were all there.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, well, this is what a London jam's like. Of course, it wasn't. It happened to be on tour and came down.
Yeah, yeah.
But I was completely intimidated. Didn't even put my name on the list, and just sat in the audience thinking, what the fuck have I done? I want to go back to Nottingham and be a slightly larger fish. Um, and luckily, I stuck it out, and I went the next week, and it was a bit more regular. Although the standard of musicianship was ridiculous, it was crazy. Um, so but it was like in any good sport, you raise your game according to the level of the person you're playing. And I still to this day enjoy being surrounded by musicians who are far superior to me because it makes me better. And I still do that. Uh, so yeah, that was a great experience. And through that I discovered Ain't Nothing But the Blues. My band became almost the house. I got my first band together in London from there. We kind of became the house band, more or less. Played the regular, ran the jam session for 10 years. Yeah, that was. I'm playing 9:30 till 3 a.m. every night. Certainly makes you learn a lot of material. So that when you go and do a regular gig and it's 90 minutes, it's water off a duck's back. I'm used to playing 4.5 hours, so you end up with an endless back catalogue. So yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about that experience. Really, moving to London was the best thing I ever did. Someone advised me to take a risk at failing. They said you're afraid of failure, and you have to allow yourself to fail. That was a very important lesson.
Who said that? Who was it? Who was it who said that?
It was actually a guy who I co-wrote a lot of songs with, even though he's not a professional musician or songwriter. He just has a great gift for lyrics and a great love of sort of Americana and blues and stuff. And his career was like a business troubleshooter, so he'd be flown into big multinational companies and figure out what was going wrong and how to fix it. So he was very good at giving that kind of advice,
Yeah.
where are you going wrong, So that was a great life lesson for me.
Absolutely. And I was wondering because this might actually I just remember something. This might be completely wrong, but I'm going to ask anyway. You mentioned a story about Did you tell me the story about Chaka Khan jamming in Cricklewood? Is that have I remembered that completely wrong?
Give me 1 second. I've got to plug something in. Hang on. Oh, lucky I noticed that. My charger's not in, and this laptop could turn off anytime. So that was another great jam. Yeah. So every Sunday, I'd get together. It was in Kilburn actually. Biddy Mulligan's.
Good stuff.
And my dear friend Dave Clark, great bass player, who still lives in Kilburn, we put this band together. We'd have Mike Bailey, who was playing with Mick Taylor at the time. We'd have Richard Bailey, who'd been playing with Jeff Beck, amongst other people. Tucker Boom, who's Chaka Khan's sister, would come down. We'd have Winston DeLandro, who's ex-Bob Marley, on guitar. And I to this day, I don't know, we'd all get like 25 quid, in the bucket.
Yeah.
And everyone showed up every week, and some of them had been on tour, and I needed the work, but none of them did really. They just did it for the love of it, and we did mostly sort of funk, like meters and reggae stuff, not much blues at all. We do like Tower Power and stuff like that. Yeah, and Chaka turned up at least 2 or 3 times, and remember the first time she came, she got on the drums and just murdered everybody. We had the drummer from Prince's band showed up, big guy, Michael. And played the funkiest funk I've ever heard with just a kick and a snare. And like, there are other drummers in the room who play kind of busy, and they'd be looking at him going, how is that the funkiest? Like, boom, boom, that was it. Anyway, yeah, Chaka got up and she called Come Together, Beatles, and just looked at me and said, you're doing the low harmony. And I was like, oh, okay. But it was great. It was
no
great.
Pressure, yeah.
Yeah, a little bit of pressure. Again, I was very, very, very overwhelmed by the talent on that stage, but it was very inspiring. I learned such a lot, especially about, sort of the difference with reggae guitar, such a different approach, and funk, and all that stuff. Although it's all very, very connected to blues, which is just the beginning of all that. It was just great lessons. These were all huge lessons for me.
The first time I saw you play live was at the Burton and Agnes Jazz and Blues Festival, and I think 2011 or 2012. And as I remember it, the band was Luther and Cody Dickinson from the North Mississippi All Stars, and Alvin Youngblood Hart. I was like, and you obviously incredible as well. But I was like, whoa, what a lineup! Could you tell us about how you met those guys? How that happened?
It's funny, I just did Bert and Agnes again last year for the first time since then. So isn't that weird?
Yeah, absolutely.
What was I going to say? Yeah, well, the thing with Cody, Luther, and Alvin was a thing we put together called Mississippi Mudbloods, and it was just a fun little side project we did. But we did a few good tours. The lineup changed. Alvin couldn't do the next one, so we had Lightning Malcolm on bass, and on other occasions, and we had when Luther couldn't do it, we had Dwayne Betts on guitar, and a couple of other people. I mean, everyone was great. I've forgotten the name of the Welsh bass player we had, and he's wonderful, and I love the guy. His name, I've got a mental block. But yeah, what a lot of fun it was. It all came out of a conversation. My manager, Richard Pavitt, ran into Cody somewhere or other, I can't remember where, and discussed with him my love of hill country music of the North Mississippi, and they just cooked up this plan to get us together. And I went out to their studio in Mississippi and recorded my first album out there, one of three, called The Skinny. And Alvin popped into the studio by chance, and he's just like, yeah, I'll put some vocals on, and I'll play some guitar or whatever. And he said, if you need me for a tour, I said, well, we got Luther on guitar. He says, well, I'll play bass. Oh, all right then. So it was just like that. But those guys are like that, man. They kind of they just throw things together. There's very little rehearsal in the studio, and they just bang out amazing songs, and it's all done with feel and instinct, even though they're obviously maestros. I've never seen them spend long on a track. It's just like, and it's perfect. Normally first or second take. Yeah. So, which is kind of how I like to work. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I find that usually if I've done a bunch of takes, we always go back to the first or second. It's going to be the right vibe.
And how does it feel like as an English? You correct me if I'm wrong. Born in Portsmouth, right?
Close to. Well, I'm actually born in Farnborough,
okay.
North Hampshire, but I grew up in Fareham, which is very close to Portsmouth. Yeah. Horrible.
What's it like being an English guy walking into Mississippi studios? Is it just like no big thing?
Incredibly intimidating. I felt ridiculous. My feelings about my right to play that kind of music have changed significantly since then. The more I've learned from that's something I don't particularly want. That's a wormhole to get into. I was very intimidated, but they were so welcoming and encouraging. And as I found often with guys from the US and girls from the US, is that they tend to be kind of flattered that we're playing their music, I guess, as long as we do it to a decent standard. And they perceive it as we're coming from a different angle. I mean, I'm trying my damnedest to play it their way. I don't think any influence from the British side of things, because I miss the 60s boom. I've always been into the Americans. I never listened to Peter Green or Clapton or John Mayall and that stuff. But yeah, they made me feel very comfortable. I was still nervous as hell, but they just did. And Cody's a great producer, and part of a producer's job is to make the artist feel comfortable. So I was given a lot of encouragement and positive feedback. So yeah, but yeah, being in Mississippi, 100 degrees heat in Mississippi, and the Zebra Ranch studios is, it's a hell of a thing. But it's inspiring as much. It's equally inspiring and intimidating. That's all I can say. Nothing wrong with being a little nervous either.
Absolutely, it's exciting. It's exciting. I've been working my way through your albums, and it's just great, man. I love them, and the songs are fantastic. I know I'm always drawn to songs myself. I just always, and I just loved going through the variety. And it surprises you all the time with your songs. They're your thing. And there's a few songs I asked you about. And I'm gonna ask you about them because I like them. I pick the ones that I like because I'm selfish like that. I Am the Train is like a thunderous rock and roll kind of anthem, and I love it. And I love the lyrics. I'm not the tickets, I'm not the tracks. I am the train. I'm not the journey. Yeah. I'm not the railroad. I am the train. That's just great. Yeah. That's like touring, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've never been reticent to admit this. That was inspired by a line in a Martin Amis book that I've been reading. Okay. and it was the final line of a paragraph, and he didn't say exactly that, but it was the same concept, and it was like I'm not the tracks, I'm not the station, I'm not the conductor, I'm the train. And I was like, oh, that's great. Grabbed a pen and paper and basically rattled off the whole song. And I took lyrics, there's like a reference to Chuck Berry, and there's a reference to the American national anthem, North American national anthem. Like Sea to Shining Sea, America the Beautiful, that's what it refers to. But I wrote Coast to Shining Coast, but it's a knowing reference to those things, And I pulled a couple of Robert Johnson lines, not that I was trying to steal them. It's supposed to be obvious what I'm doing with that, But the song just was one of those songs that just fell out of the pen onto the paper. There's a big Dylan influence in the sort of the rapidity of the lines, and there's a sort of kind of a Johnny Cash vibe to it with the musically.
Where did you write it? Sorry, so where do you remember exactly where it was?
Yeah, it was sunny, and I was lying in my garden in Crouch End on a plane. Now, I suddenly sound very middle class, but yeah, that was that. I remember it vividly. I often don't remember where songs came from and how and where I wrote them, but very vividly.
It's a great track, man. It's interesting listening to the Man and the Guitar album. And that was recorded at the Royal Festival, right? Royal Albert Hall. Sorry, yep. Royal Albert Hall. And there's a bit when you do a country riff and you crack a joke about it being a country song, but at the end of the song you go into this bit which it's got to be a nod to Howlin' Wolf. There's a kind of falsetto thing you're doing.
Oh, I don't remember.
Okay, never mind. I heard Howlin' Wolf anyway. It's a kind of falsetto. There's not a real, and that just leads me to the next song I wanted to ask about, which is the one. Hang on, got notes everywhere. Which is the "If I Live" song on All the Rage, and is that definitely a homage to Howlin' Wolf? Would that be fair?
Or? 100%. I mean, yeah. that song kind of happened in the studio. Jimbo Mathis, who was producing, he flew over from Mississippi. It was a quote he'd either heard in person from someone, or he'd read someone said, I can't remember the exact story. I wish I could ask him, but it was someone had said to an older gentleman over there, what a beautiful day it is, and I so saying a positive message, and he replied, sure, if I live. It's I hope you have a wonderful day if I live. I think it was something like that where it came from. It was just a random thing, and I think Jimbo came up with the first verse, and then I continued it, which is the way Jimbo and I have written many songs. He'll come up with a couple of lines or a concept or a chorus, and then I'll work around it and let it grow. But he's often the inspiration for many of the songs. But yeah, it just seemed natural to do a Howlin' Wolf thing on that. We there's no hiding it. We're going for that smokestack lightning groove. And Jimbo played the drums. It was just guitar and drums. And he set up a trash can kit. Literally trash cans. He didn't use the drums in the studio. So he just got found instruments and bits and pieces and just sort of just played this real, very North Mississippi sort of style, hill country style, mixed with the Howlin' Wolf groove, So that was an unashamed nod to Wolf, of course. No denying that.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's good you mentioned Jimbo Mathis, right? Because there's I'm going to move back. I'll move on to the Stone by Stone record, that's the latest record, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, yes, it is.
Beautiful record, and there's a number of songs on that are. I mean, first of all, the whole record. We're talking about jamming. Like the opening track kind of feels like a big jam. Is that how that record happened, or was it different songs?
It's funny.
Happened, or what?
I kind of applied what I'd learned in Mississippi, and this was out in California with a very different group of people.
Okay.
But it's the two guys from the Imperial Crowns, Jimmy Wood and JJ Holiday, who I've known for many years, and I hadn't seen them for years, but they kindly came in. Yeah, and we just set up all in one room, hardly any baffling or separation, and basically we jammed that song and recorded it. I don't think that's exactly the first take, but it's certainly second or third, you know. And
Sorry, which song was that, Ian? Was that the opening track?
I assume you're talking about working on a building.
I wasn't. I was gonna get to that, but that's was that the only one that was live? Were the other songs overdubs?
That was very much live. I mean, a lot of it's live with very few overdubs. But unless you meant the song "Hand in Hand."
No, I was gonna get the two songs. I have to ask about "I'm the Shit" because it is the shit. It's a great song, and I also have to ask, what is there a Santa Cruz motel with someone covered in piss?
That again was something Jimbo. He was doing. I told him I was in the studio with JJ and Jimmy, who I just told you about.
Yeah.
The Imperial Grounds. Now they were working with Chuck E. Weiss, who's a great friend of Tom Waits and one of the people. Yeah. And he just passed away while I was the week before I went to the studio. And I mentioned this to Jimbo, and he sent me some recordings he'd made while driving, and he said these were inspired by Chuck E. Weiss, and it was kind of stream of consciousness stuff.
Yeah.
And he was kind of spoken word. Oh, there's a stairwell in a Santa Cruz hotel, and a lot of the lines in the song come from that stream of consciousness. Now they didn't really rhyme, so I would make up rhyming couplets with Jimbo's stream of consciousness. That's how I remember doing it. And then I wrote, you know, a few of my own verses in that same vein. But it was coincidental that Chuck had died whilst we were recording, so we were sort of, you know, discussing that. And the guys in the studio with me, Jimmy and JJ, were very close with Chuck, so it was. They didn't actually play on that song. They played on Working on a Building, but it was all wrapped up together, you know, the whole thing. But yeah, that was that's how that song came together. And with all these lyrics and verses that had come out of what Jimbo had sent me, I was looking for a hook line, and I've had in my notes, I've had "I'm the shit that happens" like in several places on several different iPhones and scraps of paper for years, and never found anything I could do with it. And I was like, this fits in perfectly.
Is that really about you, your life, or just?
Oh, it was just a silly. I mean, maybe subconsciously it is, but. But I just thought it was a fun line. You know, it's like, you know, we all know the phrase "shit happens" or "shit hits the fan."
Yeah.
You know, I'm the shit that happens.
It's a great song.
Thank you. No, it's fun. You know, it's not supposed to be taken too seriously, but you know, it came out pretty good. My
favorite song on the album is definitely "Gathering Deep." That's great.
Really?
Is that about a book called? Because I was trying to work out what Carcosa is. Am I just way off the mark here?
No, not at all. Okay, so it's mostly inspired by a kind of slightly surrealist kind of early horror writer from the US called Ambrose Bierce. Right? Yeah. Now, this also, again, this all started with Jimbo. This was at least the first three verses, and then I wrote three. But I couldn't have done it if Jimbo hadn't written the first three, believe me. And it was Ambrose Bierce, and that his writing very much influenced the first ever True Detective, the one with Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. And there's lots of references to him in there. And Carcosa, I believe, is the fictional town they're in, or Carcosa is one of the things that connects the TV show and the writings. Anyway, the two things all became kind of wrapped up together. But there are references to True Detective and the writings of Ambrose Bierce in that song. But you know, you don't have to know that to enjoy it. I think it's just kind of a very kind of Southern Gothic kind of interesting song, you know, and it's one of those songs that's not that obvious what it's about, which allows the listener to kind of, you know, paint their own pictures with that. You know, it's one of those. To me.
Great song, man. I'm an anorak with music, so I always want to know what the little things are on little records, what that is, and what I always Google, and I'm an anorak, always been. And I was looking at what that is, Cargos, and I'm glad that's exactly what I wrote down. I wonder if that is that. That's such. It's like a kind of hymn. You all is that. It sounds like a hymn. The song. It's great. It's
It
beautiful.
does have a yeah kind of very gospely or sort of Southern Baptist kind of vibe to it. Yeah, yeah, definitely. That's what I was going for. Well, you know, and when you work with Jimbo and you're around him, these things just pour out of him. You know, it's hard
Yeah.
not to go down that path. Um, so he kind of pulls you in certain directions without even knowing he's doing it. You know, I love working with Jimbo. It's very inspiring.
And he worked with Buddy Guy, didn't he? A bit of stuff. I don't know loads about him, but he worked with Buddy Guy and a bunch of people. Is that right?
Elvis Costello as well. I mean, he's a
Yeah.
Grammy-winning artist, but he's really he was the musical director for the Sweet Tea album, and this is years before I'd ever met Jimbo, and I think that's Buddy Guy's best album. Really opened up stuff with Junior Kimber and R.L. Burnside for me, and if you told me when I first heard it, I mean, I remember learning every song off that and playing Ain't Nothing But with my trio. If you'd have told me that 10 years later I'd be working with Jimbo Mathis, who to me was just a name in the liner notes, you know,
Yeah.
I would never have believed you. But yeah, Jimbo was already an influence even back then.
That
I
is
love that record. Sweet Tea is just a wonderful album. It really is.
it's a great record. It's interesting because my notes are in all different places. I'm just gonna go around. Um, when I saw you perform live the second time at Sydenham, I heard a couple of nods to Bill Hicks on stage. I thought I did
Oh
anyway.
yeah.
I thought I did, which is no bad thing. The great stand-up comedian Bill Hicks, who I absolutely love. And I was thinking, like, the way you talk about music and the way you perform music, it kind of feels like part of that outlaw performance. I'm thinking Bukowski, Tom Waits, Bill Hicks, the kind of people who, I think there's a quote from Steve Earle said, creativity is the ability to stare into the darkness and not blink. I think that's Steve Earle. Do you
Well,
think that's kind of where is that's what you do, right?
I suppose. I mean, I would never pretend to be anywhere near any of those guys in terms of my writing ability, but I think their influence comes from me, and perhaps I'm trying to sort of ape what they do. I don't think I go all the way like those guys do. You know what I mean? Especially Bukowski. Jeez,
Yeah.
when he talks literally about you must go all the way. Don't half-ass it. And,
Yeah.
that's a big thing, you know. And it's a shame it's become such a cliche to be an admirer of Waits and Bukowski, and it's a terrible cliche. But I unashamedly am. You know, I'm proud to say I love their writing and I think they're amazing. And Bill Hicks I mean, it's funny. I thought you were going to say watching me there, you realise how influenced I am by comedy, which
Bill Hicks is the best.
it might have sounded a bit like an insult, but I would have taken
No.
it. Honestly, I don't listen to much music at home. I listen to a lot of comedy.
All right.
Yeah, well, I've usually got podcasts on, normally comedy podcasts. I mean, even like Frank Skinner show and stuff like that. So comedians like Bill Hicks and Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, George Carlin, you know, a huge influence on me. And I imagine that somehow, I mean, I like to think there's quite a lot of humor, even if it's dark humor in my stuff. Even if it's just play on word stuff, it's still humorous, or it's supposed to be, you know. So yeah, I'll take that. Thank you.
So good, so good. It's interesting. I'm gonna talk about Tom Waits because I love Tom Waits. There's nothing wrong with that. And I remember when I first heard Tom Waits, I was like 20, and I got hooked on Closing Time, which I know is not a very typical Tom Waits album, but when I heard it, that totally changed my life, man. I was just from that moment, started wearing a hat. I thought I want to be that guy, and obviously I can't be, but I just was obsessed with him, and I'd never heard songs like it. And when I heard the songs, I thought at the time it was about me, which is crazy because you know it's just life. But can you remember where you were at the point in your life when you first heard Tom Waits?
I think I was 13, and he was on the Tube, you know, Jules Holland show,
Okay.
48, and yeah, I was just like, what the hell is this? And I could hear this big. I was already heavily into blues, but I could hear this great blues influence, but he was coming from a different angle, and it was all weird. And then I didn't see him again or hear anything. It just seemed to come from nowhere. Of course, there was no internet stuff then. But it was a while later I discovered an album. It was Harder Saturday Night, which just blew my mind.
Yeah.
And I think I was probably 15 by then. And then the next one I got was, I think it was Sawfish Trombones, and I hated it because I hadn't gone chronologically, and I went from his early jazzy stuff to this really weird shit, and I couldn't handle it at all, and I just didn't like it. I did not like it, and I think then I did go back chronologically, and I went from Harder Saturday Night to I think Heart Attack and Small Change, Heart Attack and Vine, Blue Valentines and that. And that journey took me through to the weirder stuff. And then it all made sense. And now I love all the Rain Dogs, Frank Wild Years. It was overwhelming how that hit me. It's funny though, and I do this Tom Waits tribute thing every year in Budapest, which grew out of, supposed to be a one-off gig, and 20 years later we're still doing it. We get like 1,000 people. It's just a party on the stage. It's more of a celebration of his music, Anyway, a couple of us have discussed this, and I feel the same. That early stuff I find difficult to listen to now because I can hear him in character. He doesn't sound quite himself, like he hasn't discovered himself yet. And I enjoy those. Because he's very young and he's trying to sound much older, and it sounds a little fake is the wrong word. He's in character, he's acting. Whereas I think the later stuff and the more recent stuff, it's much more him. But yeah, I can hear a young guy trying to sound like a hobo and stuff, and I find it a little. It's weird to say this because I love him so much, and I don't mean any disrespect to him at all. But I've read that he feels the same about that early stuff as well. He's like, I'm sure that's a very common thing. I'm pretty sure if I heard my earliest recordings, for one, they wouldn't be anywhere near as good as his, and I'd probably be very, very uncomfortable with them. I much prefer I like the very early stuff, like Closing Time. I think he sounds genuine on that, his singer-songwriter and stuff, and Harder Saturday Night. And then I'd probably skip through to Rain Dogs, that sort of era onwards. But I find like Blue Valentines, as much as that was always my favorite album years ago, and now I find it a little like that ridiculous version of Somewhere. And he's like about 27. It's like, I know what you were going for, and it was great at the time, but I find it makes my palms sweat when I hear it.
Right. Part of the Saturday Night, there's that track Fumbling with the Blues. Oh my God, that is, whew. All the bartenders know my name. That's just
See, that I love it. That kind of negates everything I just said because I totally love it.
But that's Part of the Saturday Night. That is a bit earlier. I know what you mean. I mean, it must be hard being Tom Waits because there's so many different characters, and I don't know. He's incredible, but it's.
When you set yourself, when you are recognised as one of the greatest songwriters on the planet, the pressure must be ridiculous. I mean, I don't know how Dylan deals with it. Dylan deals with it by being weird and reclusive, as I think Waits does.
Yeah.
So, it's a hell of a lot of pressure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So hang on. We were just chatting. I forgot what I'm saying. This series is said at the beginning is how musicians work, and I set it up purely for my own selfish desires to talk to musicians who I like and talk about how they make music because I want to know. And I've tried to make each interview different based on the people, obviously. But there's one question I've asked everyone, and it's how do you work? Do you have a process each day for getting up and saying, right, I'm going to do this? Or if it was Ernest Hemingway said he had to write 100 words a day, or I can't remember. There's all these little rules that artists have. Do you have a sort of set structure to how you work? I've just said one question. I've asked you about 5, but you know what I'm coming from. Is there like a...
No, I'll be very honest. I tend to work very well under pressure. I'm not go back to Jimbo and lots of other people I've worked with. they're songwriters, craftspeople, uh, who, and they write all the time. It's just constant. Normally, I write if I'm writing for someone else, if I've been asked for a particular project, or if I've got an album I need to make. I don't. I used to, but these days, unfortunately, I don't sort of walk around thinking about songwriting. I rely very much either on the pressure of a project with a deadline, or when inspiration happens to hit me out of nowhere, and if I've got a phone or a pen and paper handy, then I try and get it down. But yeah, I'm not prolific at all, and you know, I went through writer's block for a couple of years where nothing was coming out. But yeah, when I made Stone by Stone, the last record, I wasn't expecting to make an album at all, and the whole thing fell together by coincidence for various reasons. But it started as a holiday, and then it turned out I was going to go and record because it was California, and Robin and Greta of Bo Grigri kindly offered for me to be their first recording artist. So I started scribbling, and Jimbo and I started back and forward, and that all came out, you know. So I don't have a particular process, but just before we were speaking, I'm involved in a project. There was an amazing, incredible Swedish artist called Sven Zetterberg, who I adored, who sadly passed away a few years ago. And there's a project to, like a tribute album. I don't know how secret this is, so I can't say more than it's going to be a tribute album. But anyway, I'm working on one of his songs and actually putting music to it because it was only lyrics. So my process, I guess, with that is to drink a lot of coffee and just pace around with the lyrics until the music starts coming out in my head. If that's about as close as I get to having a process.
Right. Do you tend to put, because you mentioned, I think, earlier in the interview about putting stuff on your phone. You a notebook person, or I've got notebooks, phone, tablets, all stuff scattered everywhere.
Whatever's handy. I mean, I rarely travel with a notebook. Like if I'm, well, travel, yes, but you know, if I'm in the car or, you know, in the supermarket, then and something hits me. Like I said, it's rare with me, unfortunately. But yeah, I'll grab the phone and go into the notes. Yeah, so I've lost more songs in broken iPhones than I can.
Damn, that's sad to hear, man. That's a tragedy.
Yeah.
How many songs do you? I shouldn't ask. It's bringing up bad. It
I
breaks my
don't
heart
know.
when people do songs.
I mean, I remember I was recording my album. Was it Meat and Potatoes or Swagger? One of the two. And I had a bunch of notes in a like a satchel. And there's a laptop case. And I was leaving Ain't Nothing But Jam Session at about 4 a.m., waiting for the night bus to go home to New Cross Gate. And a car screeched up. Two big thugs jumped out and snatched my laptop off me. And it had the whole album's lyrics inside, plus a couple of effects pedals and stuff. It didn't have a laptop in it. So they didn't get what they were trying to. What they nicked was useless to us. Yeah, so that was fun. So I had to rewrite the songs, and I'm fortunate I've managed to remember most of it, and some of it we'd already recorded. But I lost a ton of stuff, like, you know, and notes and stuff. So yeah, that was one particular time where this was before the cloud and all that. You know, there was no way of recovering.
That is tragic, man.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe I got better songs out of it in the end.
Maybe there's a song in that story, though. That's a good story. Two guys.
It might have gotten into a song at some point, but if not, yeah, that's worth thinking about. I'll probably throw it in somewhere.
Absolutely. So we talked a bit about. Sorry.
Night bus to New Cross Gate was quite an experience. Often. I feel lucky to be alive, frankly.
Kilburn, because I'm from Kilburn. Kilburn, because I went to school in Cricklewood, and coming home from school was a bit of wasn't exactly gentle.
I'm sure it's all gentrified and posh now, but Kilburn could be a trip. Yeah, Kilburn could be a little rough around the edges, which in a good way though. I like that. You know, I miss I miss that part of London, which may sound kind of patronising or blinkered, but I do miss the rough edges to London because that's the sort of the environment I grew up in, and I think the gentrification. Let's not get into that, but the gentrification, has positives and many negatives as well. So, yeah, good life experiences for sure, and certainly made you a bit more street smart.
Faster runner, I always found.
Yeah,
But I was going to ask about, because I talked about the Man and Guitar album and the live stuff, but like, I mean, there's a great quote in the film Crazy Heart about the harder the life, the sweeter the song, which is the Crazy Heart, the film with Jeff Bridges.
I love the film. Yeah.
Do you think that life, the touring life, I mean, it is a hard life. I mean, do you think that thing about having to live that life makes those songs happen, makes songs happen, if you make sense?
I think it does, but I think I want to stay away from that sort of cliche of the hard life, and we know what that implies. I think touring brings out the songs. And it doesn't have to be to do with drinking or anything, or late nights in seedy bars. Although that can be very influential. But I think getting out on the road and playing is the important part of that, and that's where you get the experience and the knowledge, and just playing hundreds and hundreds of gigs and hundreds of songs makes a better songwriter and artist. And I think that's a little bit of the problem. I don't hear as many good lyricists in sort of the roots genre these days, and I think part of that is to do with people are getting on quite a big platform at a very young age. Not that they're untalented, but they're inexperienced, and it's like, they might be 18 and suddenly they're the future of the blues, and based on their raw talent. But then they go in, and maybe do their second record, and they don't have the songs, and they don't have the life experience or the touring, gigging experience to back it up. And so there's a lot of great guitar solos, but there's not a lot of good lyrics or good vocals, frankly. No, and I think it's a shame that gigging and touring experience before you go in and record, having years of experience, is something that's lacking. Yeah, but I don't want to sound like I'm slagging people. I'm not at all. I'm saying there's a lot of talent, but it's the goalposts have changed somewhat. And I think also you need to have money behind you to be able to get anywhere. And again, that does not negate the talent of the people, the younger people recording on that scene these days at all. But I'm saying that I think poorer people and more working class people without financial backing, with equal talent, are not getting the opportunity. So like I said, it's a different different playing field, I guess, is what I'm trying to say these days. And
if you pick out lyricists, who would you? We talked about Tom Waits and Dylan. Would they be the kind of like gold standard for you of lyricists? Would that be who you would go to if you were going to pick out lyricists that have inspired what you do?
I think everything's AD after Dylan, right? So I don't think I think objectively he's the best songwriter. He's probably the guy that every other songwriter would say is the best songwriter. I think he probably is. There's a lot of those early R&B songwriters, and I feel unprepared because the names are not popping into my head. I'm a huge fan of like Townes Van Zandt, Chris Christopher, massively. But I mean, Arthur Alexander, I think wrote some very beautiful songs. There's so many, it's crazy. But I think Dylan's probably the pinnacle of what we consider a singer-songwriter. It doesn't really get. Prince is another one, though. I mean, I think Prince is one of the greatest ever. I mean, his output and the breadth of what he could write about in every different style and genre is terrifying. So I'd put Prince up there in the top 5 for sure.
Wow, it's an interesting one. That's an interesting one to pick out. And do you write when you're going back to touring? Do you write? Can you write on the road? I mean, I personally love writing on the road when I'm traveling, but
yeah, I mean, I've done it. But yeah, like I said, it strikes me at random times. So, I'm just answering a message here, very rude, but it's very, very urgent. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do write on the road. For me, it's random. It's when it hits me. But I often find on the road. I mean, I remember being on tour with the Mississippi Mudbloods and sitting in the back of the van with the tour bus with Luther Dickinson, and I rattled out 2 of the best songs I've ever written. There's one called "Wasted Freedom," which I'm extremely proud of, which was very much a tribute to Chris Christopherson, funnily enough. But I remember very proudly showing Luther, like probably boring him to death. I was like, "Look at this verse, man," and I was really, really proud of myself because I'm sure you know what it's like. Sometimes you surprise yourself. It's like, oh, I'm not struggling here. This is really flowing, and it's like this sounds very pretentious, but it's the old thing. You feel like you're channeling from some higher place. It sounds incredibly arrogant, but it does feel like that sometimes. That was one of the ones where it was just pouring out of the pen. But normally, I find if I'm on the road, I'm too busy organising, finding out hotel addresses and sending riders and herding cats and organising catering and basically acting as tour manager, which is another reason I sort of burned out last year was taking on too much, But I've never been financially in a position to have members of staff on the road with me and taking my own sound engineer and a tour manager and stuff. That's never been the position I've been in. So but I do recommend to any young musicians coming up, having a tour manager to take care of all that shit is money well spent. Got it. Seriously.
Money's the key there. I hear you. I have to do everything on my own. But I was going. The first time the second time I saw you was at Sydenham Arts Festival, and I'd seen you before with the band, and that was amazing. But it was just you and the guitar, and I'd not seen that before. And I remember in the sound check hearing your voice and just being like, "Wow, like fuck!" I mean, it was great. I mean, just me, sound guy, and you. I was like, "That's impressive." And just this massive voice, but like real soul to it. And it was weird. A week before that, you posted online a clip of Sam Cooke from the early 60s at the Apollo, I think, doing the intro to Bring It On Home to Me. And your voice is obviously completely different than Sam Cooke's. But in that clip, he does this kind of riffing thing that I'd never heard before. And he's like not the kind of clean-cut Sam Cooke. He's really going for it. And it's a kind of danger to his voice and an intensity. And I remember hearing you, obviously completely different than Sam Cooke, but that kind of intensity and the danger to the way you sing, that idea that you got a song, you're singing it like it's the last time you're going to sing it. And that blew me away when I saw you on your own. I thought it was incredible. So could you talk about the way you sing and how that's developed?
Funnily enough, Sam Cooke is a huge influence. And the song I was just working on for the late Sven Zetterberg and trying to put music to his lyrics, I found Sam Cooke was coming right through, and it was all those kind of melody lines. Not that I can sing it like Sam, and you're right, I don't sound anything like him, but it's like I'm trying to, and it's not like I'm actually expecting to get there. Sometimes I'm trying to sing like Sam and then accepting my limitations or the different way it goes, But I remember, bless lovely Paul Jones interviewed me once, and he didn't mean it. This was live as well. He didn't mean it badly. It just sounded bad. He said, "Who are your biggest influences vocally?" And I said, "Well, number one is Sam Cooke." And he said, "Really? I don't hear it." I was getting messages from people saying that because Paul just dissed you live on radio too. I was like, no. What he meant was exactly what you just said. It was, it's just the first, that's the way it came out. But I knew what he meant. I was not offended in the least. I knew exactly what he meant because I don't sound anything. And you don't hear it. Well, you kind of did, but you got where I was coming from. But yeah, Sam's vocally, he's a huge influence, although it might not be that obvious, you know. But I'm often going for him. Like there's a song of mine, "Falling Down Again," and there's several others where I'm absolutely trying to hit those major scale notes. That's what, in my layman's terms, I call it. You know, not so many of the blue notes, if you know what I mean. More of the major scale, or switching between the two. So yeah, it's Sam's way up there in my vocal influences. Oddly enough, I hear it so much in Nick Lowe. I'm sure I've never met Nick, which is disappointing for me because we have so many mutual friends, and I've often not shown up at things where he's shown up, and I could have been there, jam sessions and stuff. I've often wanted to ask him how big a thing is Sam Cooke to him, because I hear a massive element in his vocal approach. James Hunter too. I think that's more obvious though.
He's great.
I'd love to know all of James's influences actually, and I can just ask him. I can just text him. But I think there have been many of sort of obscure R&B singers that I may not have even heard of, or you know, won't be that familiar with, who are in there. So I hear the obvious stuff like Sam Cooke, but I reckon there's a ton of them. You know, I'm a huge fan of James.
Were you singing from a young age, or choirs, or when did you start singing?
No, I really wasn't. I mean, I was 16 when I jumped up in public, but I was not really. I was just very into music. So I don't know where that came from, but my family's very musical. I mean, my cousin is a professional musician. I used to go to his gigs. But my immediate family are more like music fans, and my dad sings in the choir now, funnily enough.
Right.
But yeah, it was more like we were fanatics about music. I just remember vinyls and CDs and tapes and stuff being on all the time, music being on all the time. Which it turned out, I thought everyone was like that, but it turns out it's not the case. And I think I was 3 when I got my first vinyl, which was bought with Christmas gift money, and I obviously asked my parents to get it, but I think it was Slade's "Mama, We're All Crazy Now" on single. And most people, if I've seen interviews with people, well, what was your first record? And it's like, oh, I was 11 or 12, you know, I was 3.
Wow.
And I remember browsing through record stores, you know, at sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and just being very obsessive about music.
And your parents, you said your dad got you. He was into music, or he was in a choir. So
but I mean, my whole family were just very into sort of soul, Motown, Stones, Beatles,
yeah,
you know, Ray Charles, and all that stuff. I think I was the sort of one that discovered the blues through that, or got more into the blues. But yeah, I mean, there was always stuff playing. You know, Dusty Springfield and Smokey Robinson and all that kind of stuff. And of course, all the glam rock like T-Rex.
Right.
And the Sweet, the Kinks. That was big in my house. We all loved the Kinks.
Wow. And you said you were the one who got into blues. What was it was there a record or an artist? I see Muddy Waters behind you. Yeah, he's there as well. Yeah. Oh, what have you got? Any other one? What's that?
That's Wolf.
Oh wow.
There's Muddy, and there's young Johnny Cash.
Wow, that is cool. And you got a T-shirt. Can you show the T-shirt? Because that was before. Wow.
Wonderful, Hubert Sumlin.
Howlin' Wolf's guitarist. Is it true that Muddy Waters tried to nick him? Have I heard that? Have I made that story up?
Yeah, Hubert told me. Well, every time I met Hubert, he told me the same stories, as if, he told him as if it was the first time he'd ever told him. His enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And you listen to him like it was the first time he'd ever heard him. But he was the most charming, sweet, sincere, giving person. You know, just and anyone who met him, he just really touched them. But But yeah, that story was true that Muddy stole Hubert, or Wolf fired Hubert and sent him to Muddy, and there was all this back and forth rivalry. I mean, in my opinion, I think a lot of it was not. I think they admired each other very much, and it was more of a friendly rivalry than has been made out. I think they admired each other a great deal. But what a time to be around, you know.
Absolutely.
And Hubert's guitar playing is so influential. I was lucky enough to play with him. Him and Eric Gales and me, just having a little jam session. This is before Eric sort of his career took off to the level he deserves. You know, I think he was still kind of struggling at the time. He was more of a local hero in Memphis, and yeah, I got to sing with Hubert and Eric like in a record store.
Yeah.
For a movie that was being made about Memphis music. And I was definitely trying to do I'm embarrassed now. I think I would approach it differently. This was about 10 years ago. And of course I was doing my best Howlin' Wolf impersonation. And I reddened thinking about it, thinking, I wish I'd just done it more as myself. You know, but I thought that was the appropriate thing to do at the time. I wonder what they were thinking, really, inside. Like,
I'm sure they liked it, man. It sounds pretty good to me. But yeah, I'm sure they liked it.
It was, you know, I would certainly approach it differently these days. But yeah, it was a great experience. What a wonderful thing. And I was lucky enough to be in Hubert's company a few times, and just a wonderful human being. And finding a vest, or tank top as we call them these days.
Yeah.
Hubert on was quite a find.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, Ian, it's been amazing, man. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. It's been
my pleasure. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for asking interesting and informed questions, because I'm sure you're at least as aware as I am. It's not always the case.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Good.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks a lot.
No, I love talking to musicians about music. I'm going to be one of those people who does a picture just to prove this event happened. So if either of us get arrested, we've got an alibi. Ian. Here we go. Can we do? Good stuff. That's the one. Right, magic. Thank you so much, Mr. Ian
Thank you.
Siegal.